All right, we are live. Welcome to another weekly of the new diffs architecture workflow meeting, synchronized meeting for EMEA and Americas. I'll start off with I'll hijack the agenda just for a little bit. Just an FYI, Natalia, in case you missed the update on Slack, Dr. Pluhina is now our coach. She'll be helping us find a way throughout the whole process of publishing this blueprint and giving some advice along the way. So thanks, Natalia, for the help. This came up in the review of adding the blueprint to the documentation. So welcome. Do you want to say a few words?
Thank you. It's nice to be in Create group again, at least temporarily.
Yes, like I always say, once create, always create. So you never left. All right, thank you. Let's move on to Stanislav. You have a little point there.
Yes, I've populated a list of issues with diffs. It's mostly front-end focused, but I've touched a little bit on the backend side. So feel free to explore and maybe add something else.
I was thinking about adding a separate section there with accessibility issues. They're front-end, but there might be quite a bit of them, so maybe an extra list for that.
Yeah, I think
sure.
you already did an audit, right? The document, or at least started the audit of the current diffs, right, in the MRs. I think it would be definitely worth surfacing the problems there, but still linking to the full audit is useful. The document to the document you're getting ready. Because that will definitely be helpful for us to understand exactly what are the big issues there. Yeah. Cool. I was, for the sake of everybody, I was just going to be sharing the screen real quick. Sorry, my throat is killing me a little bit. So just as just so that we can all get a little synchronized here. So you highlighted the virtual scrolling problems. Do you want to walk us through, Stanislav? We have a short agenda. Do you want to walk us through? Just briefly.
There's like a lot of stuff to cover. I can focus on scroll issues, and probably everyone here have faced one of them at least once in GitLab. So they're mostly about stuff when you click on sidebar items. If the item is not loaded, usually it will do nothing, or in the worst case, it can break the whole page. Also, we've had some issues in the past when you linked to a specific file or to a specific line and then used that link to go to a new page. Usually the file won't be scrolled to the place, so you will just see the first file and nothing will happen. So we've tried to fix that a couple of times, and I see people still having issues with that. Even though we have testing in place, it's still not enough. There are some edge cases that we didn't cover. So there's a lot of stuff to be improved in the scrolling area.
So I want to provide a bit of context here. So the scrolling issues we saw coming up in the merge requests came up from the progress through first loading the whole diff at once, and then loading the diff in batches, which some parts weren't loaded, and then introducing virtual scrolling. So there was a bunch of changes in the dynamic on how things were loaded that were for the sake of performance, but created this sort of like sometimes race conditions, whether things are loaded or not, without proper checks. So that's probably something that we need to incorporate in the architecture, is that being prepared for that synchronicity, or I don't know, event-driven design, so to speak. But definitely there's a lot of issues that come out of those decisions, and just the evolution of the code base over time. You do mention a bit of a backend bits here, the slow syntax highlighting. This has been fixed by now, unable to fetch a specific file. However, it uses a different endpoint that we were suspicious about the performance, because it doesn't have all the optimizations that the the normal one has. So we definitely should have that in mind when we're thinking about ways of fetching things, what's the best way, and all that stuff. Delay on e-tag cache responses and overloading Redis with caching. That one we need backend folks to come over and help us out on that section. Cool. All right. So we had a bit of an overview, and please feel free to engage there in the issue asynchronously, and Paulina, definitely the accessibility issues would definitely be useful to highlight there too. If you don't have issues, just a summary like Stanislav did is useful as well. Alrighty. All right, moving on to the next point. I have it. I just wanted to let everybody know that the blueprint page has been published, like the draft, the initial very empty placeholder kind of thing. So the idea is now, as the ongoing discussions come to a close, that will move the conclusions and the directions over to the documentation. So we already started doing that with the order of priorities. We're definitely going to be doing that with the definition of done, the meaningful metrics. All of that will make its way to that page. And I'd like to remind anybody can just open a merge request to add that. As soon as the discussions come to a point of like, yep, feels like we're in a good spot, just go ahead and open the merge request, and you can all review and collaborate. So questions about that? All good? Oops. Cool, yo. I wanted to bring up the time of the meeting. It's probably going to be for the recording because there's not a lot of people outside here. But essentially, APAC had no attendance again this past week on Thursday. The question is like, does anybody have any ideas on how we should deal with that? I haven't chatted with David and Ash, that are the immediate engineers that come to mind that are in that time zone. So I'll leave here the question open-ended. If somebody has any ideas on how we can make the APAC call a little bit more useful, or give them a place to present proposals or discuss things, whether we do need an APAC call is also a question. So keen to hear your feedback. On this one, it's currently clashing with the front-end weekly meeting, and the question is, should we move it to earlier or to later? And let's see what people think. Stanislav.
Yeah, for me, earlier is better because we also have front-end vision group meeting near that time. So yeah, if we move it later, it will also collide with this meeting.
And then after that, it's too late for you. Yeah, I get it.
Yep.
Thomas, what time is it over there? 7:30?
It's 7:30 right now. 7:45.
That's the struggle.
Yeah. I was just going to chime in and be like, well, for me, it would be great if we moved it later.
For you and Carrie, that's the thing.
If we move it to like 30 minutes later or an hour later, I think it still be fine for me.
Okay, so I'm going to document here the trade-offs, and then we're going to be taking this asynchronously. So essentially, earlier means Patrick might make it more often, more convenient for Maya / front end. Later. Oh, then that means that US folks can't attend. Later, US folks can't attend. Patrick can't make it, including.
Maybe we can move the call to another day, like Monday, because I don't see any meetings on Monday happening.
So yeah, what I'm struggling with is exactly the time itself. The collision with the front end folks is just the front end weekly, just one of them. But I'm trying to understand, maybe instead of trying to stretch things into an APAC call, we can potentially have a little bit more tight oscillation of times. Yeah, I need to sit in front of a calendar of a time zone thing and just shift things around and see where it lands. But
So I know the time isn't great right now, but I will say that at this time of day is not like, it's not undoable for me, right? So like
Okay.
7:30 is okay. Carrie, I think maybe she said the same thing. She's like 6:30 isn't the worst, but like, I mean, come on, it's 6:30. That's the worst. So
To me, that's literally the worst. But okay.
yeah.
No, all right. So I didn't expect us to have an outcome here on the call. So I'll take these out and I'll think of something and come up with a proposal asynchronously and chat with you on Slack. Cool. So which takes us to the current things, the current ongoing effort to document the current state of diffs. And if I remember correctly, we were, oh yeah, because Igor said he'd be out of office. That's why Igor's not here too. So we're waiting on source code backend. I haven't heard. Jacques, do you know if Igor has added anything for source code backend?
Yeah, so I'm looking at the issue right now. It looks like he added a diagram for the backend part of the source code pages. It looks like he wants some input from the other backend engineers as well, just to check if he's missed anything.
Okay, and that's exactly what we need to do once we have all the diagrams in place. So there's progress there. That's good. I'm trying to find Igor's. Yep, found it. Copy link there. I'm going to put it here. So okay, we have that. Front-end source code, we already had that from last week. That's Jack. Jack added. So it seems like source code, we have something to base it off. Code review backend, we had, what were we waiting? Oh, we have the documentation being updated itself. I feel like that's what we've had from Patrick and the folks. Yeah, and the front end, diff step chart in the docs now. So we had, we converted that to Mermaid. Oh, yes, we do. Nice. Thomas, go ahead.
Wish we had more control over how Mermaid
shown.
renders, but yeah, it's there. So
I mean, if anything, can't we inspect it and move it to, no. Well, we need to get the source code and then get it into an editor. But yes, so at least we have them there. So it feels like we're in a good spot. It feels like we have a snapshot for all 4 contexts. So what I was thinking now that we have all 4 is to ask everybody to review them in the next couple of days, and potentially we could have a discussion or just a call to answer questions. Maybe we can use the next week's call for it to clarify any particular questions that people might have about the diagrams, because the whole goal is to align things both on the front end and on the back end, including Gitly. I'm particularly, this is the part that I don't know, I'm particularly interested about the back end ones and getting to know that a little bit. So I'll take a look at those and see what questions I have. But the idea is then to try to see things that work well, things that work not so well, and what can we, how can we converge it into a single architecture? But that will come once we all review these things. So I'll take an action points to ping everybody, at least the DRIs, to review the documentation that has been published then, this one's, and aim to have it discussed or to have an AMA or just some sort of like discussion about it in the next weekly call, if that sounds okay. Any other thoughts or questions or suggestions? Cool, I'll do that. Just action. There will ping everyone to take a look and discuss in next week's AMA style. It's not how you do it. All right, cool. Thomas, you have the next point.
Yeah. So in talking about some like technical performance metrics, I think it's really important that we define who we are trying to serve with this, because what I'm suggesting comes from a certain place, which is like really low power devices on unreliable networks, like developing country type stuff. And we really need to nail down whether that's our target, whether we should be doing that. Because if we're not targeting those users, we can adjust our budgets. And that's like, me targeting those users might be making me talk past people about like not being on the same page. So I would really like to hear people's ideas about who our like target should be. Kai probably also has some ideas about this, but from my perspective, the more users we serve, the better for Kai. So that's where I'm kind of coming from. So would like to get inputs here.
Stanislav, you have a point?
Yeah, I want to mention that most of the reports I've seen, when people mention that merge requests are very slow and hard to work with, they're coming from people that are like trying to review a merge request that has 100,000 lines changed, something like that. So yeah, if we focus on that, that's one issue. If we focus on like low power devices, that's another one. But I haven't seen any issues with people coming and saying, I want to render this on my Nokia 3310 and it doesn't render at all. So
so I have a theory in that issue. I wrote, I think, my very first comment. My theory is that those people are already not using GitLab. They've just been excluded by our product already, because people on low power devices, probably not a Nokia 3310, but like on low-ish power devices, they can't use diffs. It's like 4.5 megabytes, and it takes me on my gigabit internet like 6 seconds to load or something. So if they're on 100K or something, it would be in like an hour. So they're already gone, so we're not going to hear issues from them. So that's why I'm suspicious that like just because we're not hearing from people who want to use it on like low power, low bandwidth, doesn't mean that they are not out there. The this goes back to, I think I think it was the last meeting of this maybe, or a front end meeting. Andre mentioned the story of the YouTube engineer who was trying to get YouTube under 100K, and their metrics got worse when he did, because suddenly people in like parts of the world who could never even think about using YouTube before could. And so then like latency started getting really bad because they were using it from places they'd never used it before. So I think those users are out there, and we're just not able to serve them right now. But I want to hear comments in that issue. It doesn't really matter where. There's a thread on like technical limitations, technical budgets, which is kind of where this is coming from. But if you just want to leave a comment like, here's the user I think we should support, that can be a totally different thread if you want.
You want to hear comments in that issue, or do you want to read comments in that issue?
Either or. If you want to leave an audio note, that's great.
I'll share my thoughts here too. So whenever we have this exercise about looking at who's our users and all that stuff, there's always the thing about we should aim for where we want it to be, not where we are. Right now, we might say, like, we can look at the mobile users and say it's a very tiny fraction of users, and the justification might not even be about performance. It might be that just the UI looks crunched. It looks very small, and it's a hard task to do. And we've trained our users to don't do it on a mobile, for example, which is not to say that this project could change that. So let's keep an open mind in that regard. Exactly. So we should keep strict in ourselves. The other part of my answer, or my thoughts, is that every conversation I have with Kai about this, it's very clear that performance is a feature for our users. And whenever they complain, I don't think the majority of the complaints, like Stanislav was saying, is not coming from problems loading the app. It's mostly about time processing the data that we need for the app to render, which is a different part of the budget, but it's still part of what we should be considering. So instead of like being highly focused on extremely nimble bundles, which is a thing, but mostly for processing, TBTs, that sort of thing, rather than time transferring bytes on the wire, right? So there should definitely be strictness in the budgets, but I think what we should definitely keep an eye on is for optimizing low processing times when showing gosh, there's probably a better way to describe it. From the moment the user acts and they get the data they want, or they have the render they want. So yeah, I think we should definitely focus on making sure that we pick meaningful metrics that forces into having those restrictions, into prioritizing the desired content first, all the way back from Giddily all the way to the front-end application. Yeah, I can see that coming. So yeah, so that's my thoughts. But we should definitely discuss it in the issue and try to advance that asynchronously. I'll share my thoughts there on that issue too. Anyone has any more thoughts here today? All right, let's try to make these issues come to a first version soon. Remember, we might still revise the actual numbers as we go. We might still revise the actual things, but we should definitely start to bring this up to a close, because these are the framework on how everything else, for example, when we start discussing server-side rendering, or we start discussing streaming, all of those things need to be looked at in a framework of expectations and benchmarks and budgets, and we'll definitely need to have these already in place. So the quicker we can get a first version, the better. Which brings me to the accessibility thing. Paulina, you already replied?
Yes, to your fantastic list. I did.
Yeah. So one of the things that came up in the accessibility, for everybody to be aware, is a lot of the guidelines come to the authoring of content. And in diffs, I mean, as far as we consider authoring content, is leaving comments. You can leave a comment with a little suggestion, but essentially the authoring of content typically happens in the editor, in the markdown editor or the content editor or something, which means that we can create some sort of guidelines for that tool, but it's probably not going to be implemented by the create teams themselves. Or, gosh, where is content editor? Is that plan or is that editor? Plan. So
it's plan, yeah.
Got it. So it would be coming over to the plan side. We have to cross borders, present our case, explain why this is important. And it's fascinating, the guidelines that Paulina presented, because a lot of the things it's just helping the user realize that they're producing inaccessible content. And it's pretty much just highly focused on the editor experience. Whereas other parts of the guidelines, which I think makes much more sense for our effort here, or at least that we can execute on, is the navigation. Like navigating complex application with a lot of data. How can we make it easier for users with assistive technology to navigate those by establishing expectations and establishing these things? Okay. So just so I understand, Paulina, is the ball on your court there to produce?
Yes.
Something?
Yes.
Okay. And then once we have that, we can probably move that over to the documentation together with the performance budgets that we're discussing above. And they're independent. We can make them committed or merge whenever they're ready. So
sure.
It's exciting, definitely. All right. With that, it gets to the bottom of the agenda. Anybody has anything else they want to discuss? Things that might have been clear that you want to discuss, or should we give some time back to people?
I having
Thomas?
worked in the diffs app for 4+ years now. I'm not sure how complete that chart is that we added to the docs. And when I say I'm not sure, I mean I literally don't know. It's not that I have concerns, I just don't know. So yeah, Phil, I don't know if do you know if it's like, is this everything? Did we completely document diffs here?
Probably not. No, there's probably
I think
more to
we
it.
documented the component tree, right? But not
It's
the
kind
data.
of like as close to what a normal diff would use to render, but there's like loads of weird different views that get rendered as well that might not be documented properly. And yeah, we haven't documented the data side of things.
Is it worth going back through it? So having converted the Excalibur to this mermaid chart, like I didn't have a red flag go off like, oh, I know it's missing this. And so I don't know what I would do. I guess we would just have to step through the code and just see if there's any branches missing as we go through this chart, which is doable.
So that's what I did at the time of creating it, but that was like a year or so ago.
Yeah.
So there's probably a lot changed since then.
I mean, maybe it's just worth, maybe I should just go in and edit this doc and say like, this could be incomplete. Don't like use this as the source of truth.
So this is a really good point, because when we talked about this, the whole goal of document the current state is to guide us in identifying an ideal architecture. Okay, it's not the architecture, but for example, what we can already see, like when we look at these, like there's a lot of stuff here that are also applicable in the repository. So we can probably abstract this in a way that is generalized to all contexts. Like when we're looking at a commit, when we're looking at a commit in a repository, there will be renamed files in those commits, right? And we're looking at comparing the branches, it will be there. There will be renamed too. Comparing branches, will you always also catch? Yeah, I think it would. So we can starting to see that there's a bunch of things here that are common for every case of the diff. There's probably some areas here in this tree that don't make sense for the repository, which we can take notes, and then we can help, that can help the conversation in, for example, one of the things that we've talked already is that will be sort of part of the architecture is the viewers for the types of file, where we can have like if it's an image, if it's a text, if it's a binary, all that stuff. But more than that, that Eduardo suggested is to also include a way that we can have a rendered version of the diff, which would benefit some cases like the Jupyter notebooks and potentially others, Markdown, for example. And that's the kind of decisions we need to support here in this architecture, is support different ways to support different ways to display the diff to the user, which will extract out of this diagram and this knowledge, I would say.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I just said, okay.
Okay, cool. Cool. What I would also say, we don't have to have everything in one diagram. If we have another way of presenting other parts, I know that the backend did several charts when we go on the flow and in this, like different ways of communicating things, especially when we're talking about different components and different parts, like Italy and all that stuff. So we can present parts of the application and data flows differently. We don't have to be restricted to one particular diagram, okay? If it makes it harder, just split it into multiple diagrams, and we can have a different perspective, a different view or different lens on the data flow, for example. Cool. So anything else?
I just wanted to add that we probably need a chart of all the diffs features that we have, because the structure is one thing, but also inside each of the components, it might contain 5 different features for a particular view. Like an image preview can have a commenting functionality that you can click anywhere on the image and leave a comment. Text files have side-by-side view, inline view, no white space view, so stuff like that. And since we are moving to a new diffs architecture, we probably should satisfy diffs feature parity with what we have right now. So I think it makes sense to document everything that we have, so once we move to a new architecture, we don't miss any of the features.
All right. You want to start an issue with that, Stanislav? Because I feel like that's a separate effort, and it's not necessarily a front end thing. We might involve product here as well to ensure that we cover it. Of course, we can look at the code, and that's definitely a way to get that. But what I want us to have is that definitely makes sense. Like feature parity makes sense, but maybe not every feature needs to be available everywhere, or there could be some tiered approach. So
I was just going to mention that our order of priorities puts feature coverage actually as third on the list. So
by design.
Yeah, and the all those things you mentioned are correct. They are sort of covered in that chart very abstractly. Like diff row, I think, is what's handling parallel versus inline, and like design pin is what's handling like being able to click anywhere. So like they're in there. It's just not like explicitly mentioned. So it probably is good to like list out the features that each component covers.
I hate to say it, but it feels like this is a spreadsheet. It should be a spreadsheet or a markdown table. I don't kill me, but
spreadsheets.
But essentially, it looks like we need to have like an array of like features, and then try to make a decision about whether they're applicable to all the contexts of diffs or not. Like for now, we should definitely base it off the domains we currently have. I don't know if we have any features on the repository commit that are not in the merge request, but maybe that's why we should go and take a look. So it feels like it's a feature table for all the diff contexts, and then just mark across or a check mark where they are available, and potentially we can have a discussion about whether they should be available on everywhere or not, and potentially, yeah. But that feature table will be useful later on when we're deciding exactly about where to cut and what are the implications. Because, for example, this could be controversial. I warn you. Should we leave comments on a repository commit? That's a product decision. It's not a technical decision. It's a product decision. And to be honest, there is arguments. I'm just saying there are arguments. Maybe I agree with them that if you leave a comment in a commit, there's nobody looking at that commit. Maybe the author will get a notification, I guess. But in a merge request, it's the moment that everybody's looking at that code, or at least people are looking at that code to be reviewed. But when it's a repository, it's at rest. It's a code at rest. So should we allow discussion to happen there? That's more of a product UX decision. And I think that table will help us make those conversations easier. So Stanislav, can you open an issue for that and get the ball rolling?
I already did, linking it right now in the Epic.
Amazing. Thank you. Awesome. I'll also tag Kai on that to help us out. And then we can make there. So Jacques from source code side, it'd be great for us to pull in also if you want to discover the product a little bit, go in a journey, to also add the source code perspective on these, because again, there might be features in source code that we would like to have on the merge request. I can't remember anything, but maybe I'm missing something. So yeah, basically what I'm saying is let's crowdsource that issue. And whatever way of doing it, the table, a spreadsheet or something, just let's all collaborate in making that evolve, okay? Sweet. Thanks, Stanislav, that's useful. What else? Are we good for now? All right, we can use the rest of the time to go into the issues and share our thoughts and make those discussions go ahead. Thanks, everybody. And thanks for your time. And I'll see you around and in another call, perhaps.